We'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar on Microsoft Teams governance. I'm Sierra from the Timlin marketing team, and I'll be moderating today. I'm excited to introduce to you our presenter, Ryan Thomas, CEO and founder of Timlin Enterprises. Ryan's going to take it away.
All right. Thank you, Sierra. Just give me a second here. So you should all be able to see me now, hopefully. It's my first time using Microsoft Teams live events to do a webinar, so bear with us. We're eating our own dog food, as we call it, and hopefully I have it all worked out okay. If not, please throw something up in the Q&A if they're having a problem, and Sierra will kind of stop and address it. Thank you very much. All right. Give me a minute to switch over here. Okay. All right. First of all, thank you very much for attending. I really appreciate people taking time out of their day to spend a little bit of time joining me, and I really look forward to talking about governance, and hopefully you guys can pick something up and we can learn something. All right. So first of all, my name is Ryan Thomas. I'm the founder of Timlin Enterprises, so it's a company that's about 10 years old. I'm a former software developer, former sort of SharePoint subject matter expert, and I started this business almost exactly 10 years ago to really focus on these Microsoft tools, so the collaboration stack. So pretty much all we do here at Timlin is SharePoint, Teams, sort of Power Platform, Power Automate, and sort of help people use the Microsoft collaboration stack better. And so obviously Teams has become a much bigger deal over the recent couple of months, due to the pandemic. And so we're getting a lot more sort of information flow, questions, requests. A big uptick in the usage has spawned a lot more questions about Teams and Teams governance and how people want to manage it. So we're going to sort of go through a let's call it the blueprint, sort of high level today. And we've been living this for a while already, being a mostly remote company and using Teams already. So it's a lot of the stuff was kind of old hat for us, but we realized it wasn't bad for a lot of people. And so a couple of big things to point out here. One, that we are going to focus more on, not just on what you do up front, but really how it becomes a process, right? Governance is a living and breathing entity. We look at it that way. And so we want to sort of teach you sort of how to continue to go forward. So we approach governance differently, right? It's not the boring old just configurations and settings and documentation stuff. For us, it's about usability. It's about user adoption. It's about social engagement. It's about sort of getting value out of it besides just writing some documentation. So I can't necessarily claim to make it fun, but I will do my best. I can certainly make it more interesting than sort of the classic governance days of old. And the high level goals here are to sort of break down the elements that I want you to consider and really look at governance as maybe a platform and not just a project, and really look at it as more than just a plan. And there's a lot in here, so I'm going to sort of skim the top a little bit, try to stay on target for time. And we can talk in more detail later, and I have some sort of information at the end about that. But this should give you the high level topics to consider, and maybe, hopefully, if you like it, an approach about the way to do it. And the real goal here is to set you up for a long-term process, so that you have success over the long haul and not just for the initial exercise. All right. So, before you begin, so we kind of have a process for doing this, and this, like I said, this is the high level way that we approach the process. So we will send out kind of this, let's call it the cheat sheet, and it really has these bullets on it, and it's a little bit more detail, but we'll talk about them. And basically, it's the before you get started, you want to kind of put some thought into it so that you come across as knowledgeable, competent, and you're ready to kind of lead the exercise, assuming you're the one that's pushing this forward. And you want to think about who your governance team should be at first, right? And then there's various kind of people on that team: HR, legal, IT, maybe some heavy duty users, program management. Your mileage may vary. Your team is a little bit different, but you want kind of a wider swath of people that can help you make decisions, because you also want them to be flag wavers for you. You want them to help you with the user adoption, usability, and the ongoing feedback. We also want you to anticipate some risk. So thinking ahead about resources. Will you have resources for only a certain amount of time? And that could be people, it could be finances. Will the goals shift in your organization? Will the shiny object syndrome, as I call it, occur? And we all kind of have seen that at various times where all of a sudden this is important right now, but 3 months from now, it may be important. Something else may be more important and take over. And do you have the right people engaged, and will they stay engaged? And the reason why you think about those in advance is not just the obvious reason, but because we try to break this off in chunks. So when you break it off in chunks, you'll know how much runway you might have before the rug might get pulled out from underneath you, so to speak. So think about what you can get done in the amount of time that you're going to have people's attention. We talk about preparing and thinking about vision in advance. This is the stuff we spread around. How would you measure success? Like what does success look like? Can you get the stakeholders lined up to think about their vision and sort of provide that for you? And we'll talk about vision in a little more detail. And really importantly, evaluate the user experience of your team, your governance team, and all the end users. Kind of know where they are and what we call the maturity model of usage of these tools. Right? We want to be speaking the same language. It's a problem I struggle with a lot, is I assume people know more than they do about how these tools work. And so you want to stay at the level that they can understand and make decisions regarding those understandings. You want to gather up your company policies, make sure that you got everything ready to go in advance, that hopefully you reviewed them, you got the right people lined up, they're the up-to-date version. A lot of people don't have many of these. You'd be surprised. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but you want to have them available so you know kind of what you're guiding and governing towards. And then, start thinking about the lineup. I call it the lineup of people, the people that you're going to need after this is all said and done to kind of help make sure that everything runs. And as we're going to talk about, it's not a one-man band. It needs to be a team effort, or else it has a high likelihood of dying on the vine. And most importantly, plan for ongoing feedback. Right, that's going to be a recurring theme that you're going to hear probably 10 times. And I apologize in advance, but if it's the one thing you take out of this whole thing, which is to figure out a method that works for your organization to get feedback and lifecycle management are the keys to the long-term success of doing this right. All right. First and foremost, we believe that it starts off after sort of the initial sort of preparation is the questionnaire, and the questionnaire will be living and breathing kind of forever, and workshops. And so the way I break it down is like this. So the questionnaire is really there to level questions that are understandable by the audience so that they drive decisions that make up your governance plan. So we looked at governance, in the old days as a bunch of settings and configuration and how are we going to do this, what we're going to do. It's an end result, but we kind of go backwards and say, well, what questions drive that result? And those are the questions that you put to the team and they mull it over. Some are going to be easier than others. And that's really the heart of it, is the questionnaire drives your decision making and your process and ultimately your documentation. So you break them down, like I said, into something that people can comprehend, and then you use that to drive what we call the decision log. And I look at the decision log as maybe an advanced way of doing it. So you can store that in a place later where we hashed out this question, we came up with this decision. Here are our notes, and here's ultimately what we came up with, which drove a decision that we made for governance. And then that way you can go back to it, you can revisit it. It's defensible, let's call it, and you have something to kind of refer to when you do your next round of governance. Okay. So workshops. Workshops have become a lot more important for us because what we've realized, like I said, is that a lot of people don't know what these tools can do. So it's kind of unfair to ask people to sit in let's say a governance meeting or session if they're from, human resources or legal, and they have no idea what you're talking about, right? They don't know how the tool works. They don't know what sort of limitations or guidance they should put on the rest of the users when they don't know themselves. So we use workshops to kind of educate people, bring their awareness of the tools up in the beginning. We kind of figure out where they're at. We make sure we give them a baseline of understanding, so the governance team is sort of armed to make proper decisions, and then they're kind of able to think about how people would want to use the tools once they understand how the tools work. And that's a constant process, right? People are continuously learning how to get better and better at using Teams. I mean, I've been using Teams kind of straight away since it came out, and every day something either new comes out or I learn something new, or I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. That's the kind of stuff you want to kind of put in your toolbox and figure out where it can help your organization. All right. So once you kind of have people educated, you've got your questionnaire. You want to start with the vision, right? This is that level setting meeting, that sort of first meeting kickoff where you invite your bigwig stakeholder and you gather them up and you make sure that they've kind of prepared to spread the word to the team. The people in this room could be, depends on it. It really depends. Could be the governance team. Usually it's a little bit of a wider audience in the governance team, but not the whole company. you can kind of figure out what the right audience is. But really, it's the hey, why are we doing this? What do we hope to accomplish? Why is the company spending money on this? Why am I asking you to spend time doing this? What do we hope to gain from this? Why does the organization see value in this? And what does success look like? Is there anything that you have from a measurable standpoint to ensure that a couple of years down the road, a year down the road, you've met success? And I wouldn't say a completed governance plan is success. That's just the start, right? The success is an implemented governance plan, that where everything is working, maybe not necessarily as intended, because nothing ever works as intended, but the people are adopting the platform, they're using it, you've hit the important stuff, and that you're helping manage and maintain sort of the ongoing service offerings. But every company has kind of a really specific model or a mode about why they're doing it. Always important for people to have goals, understand how their work aligns with the needs of the organization, and that's just kind of be your guiding tenet for your governance plan. All right, next, structure. So, we believe in what we call eating our own dog food. So there's the way we do it is a sort of a SharePoint site, and I'll go through the details of that in a second, that sort of contains all the information about governance, right? It's your process, it's your data, it's your documentation, because it's going to live on. These things are going to be updated over time, and it's a good sort of opportunity to use the tools to build upon how you use the tools even more. So, quickly run through here. So I look at the governance structure site as something that contains the following, and we're going to touch on probably every single one of these throughout this sort of discussion. But really, it's obviously you have your vision, your purpose, right? Your kind of mission statement. You put that in the block at the top. We have a calendar or list event that has all your sort of governance meetings, events, maybe reminders, sort of the high level strategic stuff. You want a list of your use cases. We have a document library to contain kind of we'll call it the 4 core documents that we're going to go over. We'll have a feedback list. Like I said, the feedback list is super important. Maybe a maintenance list of activities that need to be, kind of recurring elements. If you choose to do security or audit reports, like if you're kind of looking at the last bastion of security, which is what do we do after we've implemented? How do we check on it? Do we want to put the data here for review? Maybe a feedback submission form, because you're using that feedback to collect data to drive your next round of service offerings, sort of next quarter or next half of the year. You want to make it really easy for people to get information into that list. I believe in a formal communications plan. I believe that when formal changes occur, you want to make sure that the right audience is targeted, and so you want to make sure that information is captured and that someone's responsible for sending the information out. Obviously, links to training and support and FAQs and all the kind of the standard stuff. And for those of you that like to use Teams, which I do, I would make it a team. So SharePoint's the back end, but all the collaboration, comments, running commentary, documentation, collaboration, all the kind of front end that Teams gives you for all this back end documentation and data. And then, like I said, for those of you that are advanced, you can either use the questionnaire in and of itself as a place to sort of store your discussion information, or you can actually log it in a decision log where we ask this question, we answer this question, and here it is sort of for the long haul. And my pro tip is you can use the new project features. Let's say you're not a Microsoft project expert, but you don't necessarily think that this needs that kind of level of detail. I've been toying around and using the new project features in Office 365, Microsoft 365, and I'll give you a little glimpse of what that looks like right here. So this is a sort of a sample project plan. All right. Okay. All right. Next. So you'll see something similar to this twice. The capabilities lifecycle. As I said before, I believe that there's only so much you can do at any given point in time. So we believe this is a kind of lifecycle mentality. You're going to kind of revisit this over and over again. So it's not a project, it's a supported process. And the purpose here is to really sort of hammer home that cyclical nature of governance, digital transformation, needs from the users, needs from your organization, and the technology will be changing all the time. So it can't just be a permanent fixture, right? You get through a cycle, you use the feedback that you've gathered along the way, plus your own sort of knowledge and awareness, and use that to drive the next iteration. And this also allows you to not bite off more than you can chew. So for those of you that say, I only have a limited amount of time or a limited amount of resources, you can sort of triage what you need to get done over the next, couple, 3 months with a few hours a week or whatever it is. This is what we're going to release, allow, and plan for over that period of time. And that's why it's critical to have a roadmap. And the roadmap's going to change. Everything here is it's fluid. And obviously you want it so fluid that people don't have any idea what to expect. But we believe strongly that once you sort of get through the initial phase, you build a roadmap. Like, here's what we're going to want to roll out. Here are the capabilities we want to roll out and be able to train and support over the next X number of quarters. As far ahead as you can reasonably think, knowing that each time you kind of revisit it, some priorities will change, and you might want to update what you want to be able to support for the upcoming quarter. You want your roadmap to be clearly, visible representation of a high level sort of set of capabilities. You want it to be readable and not overly complicated, and it's going to be revisited. All right. So let's start with the nitty gritty in terms of starting to question things. So we start with kind of how do you want to use Teams, and to us this is kind of we call it the use cases, and you can do it however you want. We like high level use cases because it kind of makes people think about as a certain type of end user in a certain location. They want to perform the following activities. We need to be able to support that, train that, guide them on it, make sure it's secure, safe. And the maintenance is performed on whatever it is they're doing. They're creating the right stuff here and there. And so what you do is you start to brainstorm with your team, the governance team, on people that understand what those needs are, so you can start to get them on paper. And you're talking amongst yourselves. You're ensuring that it's aligned with the vision of how the organization wants to use Teams. And there won't always be perfect alignment. You kind of have to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And remember, you don't have to support every single one of them in your initial rollout. You don't have to support every single one of them ever. Some of them may be super edge cases that you just don't feel the need to put those kind of resources into. But it's important to write them down because someone either asked for it or someone thought that it might be important. So you just kind of get it down on quote unquote paper. And think about things like external sharing and how you need to sort of share with vendors, partners, customers, right? And what policies you may want to kind of have that guides that. And the types of teams, right? Do you want to have project teams, program teams? Do you want to have intranet type teams, right? Where HR can publish information or have collaboration about information while still having kind of a formal SharePoint site on the back end? Maybe, maybe not. What should the structure look like, right? Think about how people collaborate right now in your organization. And if they're using Teams already, kind of do a little bit of analysis on what that looks like. So you can kind of figure out like, okay, here's what people are trying to do. How do we make sure that we can support that properly? What requests have you gotten already for the type of work that you've been doing? So that can sort of seed your use cases with information that you've already gotten. And then think about Lifecycle, right? So the naming of teams, are certain types of teams with certain structures containing certain data. Do they need to have certain naming conventions? I strongly recommend naming conventions, just it's easier to find. Do you want to tag, right? Do you want to add metadata to teams so they're easy to find? There's a lot of options out there. And importantly, do you want to have disposition policies where you archive, you delete certain types of teams, maybe contain certain data that you don't want out there more than X amount of time. And so they should either be archived or deleted completely when they're done. These are all the things to think about. Think about whether you use it as a telephone, right? If you're using the full sort of telephony capabilities. Some people aren't using any of the collaboration pieces at all. They're just using chat. They're using like the equivalent of Skype for business. And they're not using any of sort of the back end document management stuff. And then other people are, the exact opposite. They use a third party for a telephone, and they use Teams for the sort of document collaboration piece that a lot of us love so much. And then think about if there's any third parties or application integration that you may want to sort of add in. And you may not be able to think about that up front. Maybe something that comes as requests go along the way, or it surfaces as problems need to be solved. But if you have any requests already, it's time to get it into the books and think about it. All right, and the goal is a nice set of use cases that you can triage and say, these are the really important ones, and this is what we want to be able to support getting out of the gate. All right, then you can see me, so I'm going to stop for a water break. Okay, so creating teams. Creating teams is a big one, and it's kind of important because you're kind of balancing that concept of, do I want a whole bunch of sprawl versus how quickly do I want to be able to support people's needs getting out the gate? A lot of people turn off the ability for self-service teams creation, which is not a bad idea at all initially, just to try to make sure they don't all of a sudden wake up one day and have 2,000 teams where 20% of it's overlapping or something like that. So it's not a bad idea to turn off self-service. But here are the things to think about when you're sort of putting your how do I create teams questionnaire or items together, topics for conversations. So provisioning, right? Do you want to consider a request form so people can submit a form and there's certain metadata that you want to collect because you want to make sure there isn't already a team out there that they should probably already have access to, they maybe didn't know about, right? And so you can align this with any of your kind of metadata or tagging structure or team type structure, sort of align their form request with where they should end up. And hopefully over time, you'll find that there's already something that exists that they should be a part of instead of creating a whole new team. Do you want your creation to be manual or do you want it to be automated? You can do both. You can have someone who's responsible for getting it done. You can build a completely automated structure, and you can have sort of, you can mix or match. It's not an all or nothing solution. You can have some of it be automated. You can have a human being sort of eyeball it, make sure that it makes sense, and then push a button and it gets created, right? So you have control over how much automation that you want. We want to think about things like licensing requirements. So, like, do you need to have additional licenses for people that are new to teams, that haven't been on teams before? Make sure you kind of thought through, like, what you're going to need from that perspective, so you don't get caught kind of unlicensed or unprepared. And it all really depends on what licensing you're on now. And then think about security groups. So if talk to IT about their sort of adherence to AD, to existing O365 groups, security groups, et and figure out if you want to create sort of teams on that same mold and keep that structure intact. And then obviously the all important SLA, which is how quickly will we get back to people? How much support are we going to give people in the process of creating teams? Like, when will we make a decision? We find that the sooner that you're willing to get back to people and help them solve problems, the better their response is, the higher user adoption is, and kind of the easier they are on you when something doesn't go quite right. And then, some people, from a training perspective, some people will consider not let people create teams or own teams until they've gone through some basic training. We'll talk a little bit about training more later, but these are the high level ones to think about. All right, so security and compliance. So I look at security and compliance as falling into kind of these three main buckets, right? Compliance is I understand the rules, I understand what I'm supposed to be doing, I understand what type of information can be shared in different places, but ultimately it's up to me to comply with the rules, right? I know the speed limit, and I need to decide to obey the speed limit because my car doesn't automatically slow itself down for me. I have to make the choice to do the right thing. So train, trust, and verify. And the next is sort of the pure security model, which is you use technology to enforce those specific sort of compliance policies. If at all possible and it's not too onerous, not a bad idea to enforce security or compliance using the tools and the technology, which basically means, the speed limit is set on my car. Every time it sees the speed limit sign, it slows down automatically. I really can't go any faster, even if I chose to. And obviously there's pros and cons to that, which I'm sure many of you are aware. And then finally is kind of what you do after the fact, right? The auditing, the follow-up. If you want to it's the verify part of the trust piece. If you want to build auditing reports that you run on a monthly basis to check certain sort of, let's say, high-profile sites, you want to build DLP rules or things like that. Those can catch them on the way out the door, but sometimes it's more about a report ran that this went out the door yesterday, and you may want to go track it down. So it kind of breaks up into those three camps. As far as the questionnaire goes for security, and I don't claim to be a security expert, we would partner with someone who's sort of a hardcore CISO type instead of doing it ourselves, but we can sort of help with many aspects of it. What we don't want to do is start writing your compliance policies for you. So we want to review your existing policies, and there's always gaps. Almost everybody, once they finally break the dust off these things and look at them, they're outdated. They're not necessarily relevant. There's major gaps in them. You don't necessarily have to stop and fix all that stuff, but you could certainly address the fact that, hey, like, there really isn't any policies in place about how we're supposed to do certain things. We probably need to address that at some point, but I wouldn't let it derail my ability to kind of get some capabilities out the door with these tools. And then you want to identify risks, and I'm a pragmatist when it comes to this stuff. So I think what do I think people are going to be talking about? What type of teams do we have out there? What do I want to allow? What do I not want to allow? What do I expect is going to be the kind of usability? What types of information are we putting at risk? And I wouldn't plan for every possible edge case, because if you're trying to like plan for every possible security scenario, you're never going to get anything done. You'll just be doing this forever, right? And so I would say, identify what you can reasonably enforce, what you reasonably expect to be an issue, and get started. And then, sort of fill in some gaps with training, auditing follow-ups, and some sort of a heavier focus on the compliance piece. Determine if you need things like e-discovery or expiration policies from sort of a security or a data information protection issue, and really ask yourself how deep you want to go at first. You want to do enough, but you don't want to boil the ocean, as they say. You can always, the nice thing about this and our whole mantra here is you can always go back and add more later. You can make some adjustments. And I'm not saying, you can leave yourself wide open. I'm just saying that you have a pragmatic approach to sort of how much you want to implement versus restriction, right? And like I said, it's not all or nothing. You can make adjustments to this. You won't get one bite at the apple. And finally, sort of, keep looking for additional opportunities to identify either potential security holes, gaps, or using your sort of feedback driving format to figure out what's working, what's not working, so that you can make those minor adjustments with some real hard data. All right, how are we doing on time?
Looking good. About a half an hour in.
Perfect. Okay. Sorry, I looked at my phone and wouldn't even tell me what time it is. Okay. Maintenance. All right. So, yes, we go to the cloud and it's a lot less maintenance, but it's not no maintenance. So a good governance plan will help you identify what those maintenance activities are, and spell it out. And hopefully you put it on your little maintenance task list in your governance or guidance site, and that will allow you to kind of track it. And I'll give you some examples of things that that we would look at. All right. So the Office 365, Microsoft 365 sort of tenant message center monitoring is really important. It will give you advance notice on things that are changing. Most of them are benign messages that don't matter, but there are some that will apply to you. It's important that someone reads through them and understands what impact that's going to have on your user base, and specifically with your team's implementation, your governance plan. If they're deprecating features, if they're adding new features that will automatically show up in someone's teams, like I was just told today that pop-out chat finally came along, and I don't have it on my team, but another person in our company does. I just happen to not see that coming, and that may not be an issue for most people, but you never know what's going to show up that could sort of throw a wrench in your governance plan, right? That all of a sudden people can do that you weren't aware of. So if you stay ahead of that and you understand it and you sort of report that back to your feedback list, so someone will be there monitoring that, saying, oh, we have to plan for this. And along the same lines, Microsoft's going to have their own roadmap of software capabilities releases. That's all publicly available, and they talk about like what they're rolling out. They generally don't give you exact dates. That's sort of in your tenant message center, but they'll tell you here are the features that we're working on, and we expect to roll it out in Q2 or Q3 of 2020, or maybe even a month. And it gives you a little bit of time to understand here's what's coming, and that's not just for a risk. That's for an opportunity, right? You may have been hearing clamorings for the past 6 months that, hey, look, we really need multi-window teams because I can't stand jumping back and forth. And Microsoft's going to release that pretty soon. And so now you can start preparing for that. So how do we help people understand how to use that? How do we update our training materials? How do we make sure we support that when the requests come in? Because we know 30 people have already been asking for it, kind of thing. So keep up with your Microsoft roadmap, and just put it on your maintenance list, once a month or whatever schedule works for you. Just log in there and check to see what's changed. Do you want to do any information architecture audits? Do you kind of want the librarian? Do you want them checking on your templates? Do you want them to managing those templates? How about, are people conforming to the naming conventions, the metadata, the labeling, if you're using information protection? Are there duplicate teams out there? Do I need to kind of stay on top of this stuff as a maintenance item versus the wait till it becomes a major problem and have to kind of clean it all up as a project later? Some people take these actions more seriously than others. It's completely up to you how nitpicky you want to be, but we'd be remiss if we didn't bring it up as an option for you to consider. Obviously, do your security reporting, auditing, and analyzing. So generally, people will have some set of reports or auditing or permissions reports they want to run on a recurring basis. Someone needs to look at them and make sure that things are operating as they should, and you're kind of checking off that I completed this task and it's getting done. And I mentioned audit reporting. Make sure that you've got your disposition activities that are kicking off. So in the old days, it was the disposition workflow where, hey, this document needs to be retired. What do I do with it? You can do the same thing with teams, kind of as recurring maintenance items. And I wouldn't call it maintenance, but governance meetings and sort of strategic stuff, roadmap meetings that happen maybe quarterly, where you're kind of intaking your feedback list and you're looking at what we want to sort of offer for the next round. That's got to get on the list of things to keep doing. And then really importantly is who owns and updates all of the documentation, the materials, right? And then the communication of those changes out to the wider audience. Like those are sort of your ongoing task list of maintenance items. And a lot of this data may just spawn tasks in other areas, but at least it's a place where people can go to look and say, these are all the things that we're kind of doing on a recurring basis. So training materials, training classes, onboarding, updating, same thing. Update those materials, make sure your training's up to date, and make sure you someone's responsible for taking care of that. And then someone's really important. I left this for last. Someone's got to be curating and looking at the feedback list, and some of them will be help desk tickets hidden as feedback items. But the important thing is someone's looking at this stuff. It's cataloged, it's categorized, and that you're using this to help drive that digital transformation, user adoption, sort of end user support piece. Remember, it doesn't have to be a one size fits all. You can have sort of loose locations where you're allowing people to socialize. And you can have, sort of basically you've got sort of options for your where you're storing data, right? More to less strict or secure. All right. So, and what that really comes down to is you can go as formal as you want on all this data, or sort of light as you want, as long as hopefully you're taking to heart that it should be tracked and it should be getting done. All right. Training. As we've learned about the whole user adoption, digital transformation, sort of socialization component, having built a lot of intranets and tried to figure out ways to get people to use them, what we found is that it's really less about the technology and more about all the other pieces. So it's about the getting people to use it, allowing them to be supported, listening to their feedback and using the term feedback, and really helping them make sure they have awareness about the tools and that we're guiding them to use the tools to solve certain problems, right? That use case model we talked about. So we think that ongoing training is critical, and we kind of recommend that you have like an area or location dedicated to training. And that you can, if you really want to go the advanced model, you can combine your governance plan with your training site so that they combine together. That's kind of the Sue Hanley model. Anybody that knows Sue Hanley and her governance model is she kind of merges the two together. So your governance plan comes up with guidelines or guidances how to perform certain activities. And then those activities become sort of training pages or how-tos in a site. And so they're all kind of intermingled together. So you're training people on how you want them to use the tools that also is sort of properly guided and governed. We really recommend you sort of do the in-person live, really working directly with people. You record it, you offer them sessions, you update your training materials, keep going, repeat the trainings, so sort of don't just do it once and expect that everybody got it. You're going to have new employees, you're going to have changing training materials, you're going to have users that knew nothing about sort of, the Power Platform 6 months ago that now are a little bit more advanced and they could use that same training again. So don't give up on training. We found it really beneficial with our customers that have sort of a heavier demand that we do office hours. So that means sort of open time where someone who's a little more business analysis or training based can be available to help people, so they can come in and talk about, let's say, a problem they're having, show me how to do something, and sort of make it widely available that they're there to help you during this period of time when maybe they not comfortable asking a question to a wider audience, or they could just swing by and sort of have a casual chat about something. And then finally, learning pathways. So we'll do a shameless plug for learning pathways. We do the support. So Microsoft hired us to do the support for learning pathways. It's a great way to offer your own custom training materials. And I want to give a shout out to Julie Turner for her extremely, I would say, dedicated effort to getting learning pathways as a technology out there. It's a great tool and highly recommend you guys check it out. All right. Support. So we feel pretty strongly about support. We do a lot of that ourselves, and providing sort of competent, knowledgeable, ongoing support is pretty valuable. It's your first line of defense to your end users, right? So your end users really need to feel like they, what you're doing. And so your first opportunity to help them is by showing them that you have competent support personnel. So by competent, I mean people that are service oriented, people that are willing to take on sort of, let's call it the micro projects, people that are up to date on your governance and training so that they can sort of sing the same song you're singing, and people that are readily available to make you look better, right? Too many times we all called support for some reason or another, not necessarily internally to our own organization, but AT&T, Verizon, or whatever, and we're left with an extremely bad experience or bad taste in our mouth. But then the opposite also occurs too. Someone who's really, really good, you absolutely hang up with a smile and you go, man, like that was awesome. That was refreshing. You feel much better about the company, about the product. So the more you can kind of stack the deck in your favor with those frontline people that are really able to help you guys shine and be in lockstep with you, the better off you're going to be. So please don't just sort of make your support folks an afterthought as far as governance goes. They may not be involved with the strategy, but they're certainly involved with the support and the implementation from the end user perspective. And talk about winging it. I lost all my presentation notes. So hang on a second. I'm going to try this again. Oh, they're gone. All right. I got to do this the old fashioned way. Okay. So roles, responsibilities. So this is pretty straightforward. So we have a document. In our document, there's basically a chart that just talks about, the sort of 4 columns are the role, right? So who is the role within the organization that is most equipped to perform this maintenance or this activity item? What's the kind of specific task or responsibility that they have to manage? And what's the kind of timeline of the frequency of it? And then what kind of happens after that item occurs? So what I mean by that is, after the governance meeting occurs and there's a change to the governance plan, what's the impact to everybody else as a result of that? Like, does that have to be communicated? Which audience is it communicated to? Who's responsible for doing that? And do I have to make sure that the training people know so they update the training material? It's kind of like a cascading effect of a little bit of work that needs to get done. It's not a lot of work, but if you keep up with it and you make a couple of tweaks on the governance plan or add some new capabilities every quarter, every 6 months, you just want to update all the resulting materials appropriately, update support, update your policies, security, you know what I mean? And then you spend a little bit of time doing it and then it's done and it's all sort of running in lockstep. So communication. So we look at communication in a couple different ways. And so sometimes it gets people snarled up. I really am talking about how you communicate the information about all these tools and what you're trying to do to the organization. But what I'll often forget and I'm remiss about is that it's also Teams as a communication tool. So first of all, you're going to decide, what are we using Teams for, right? And it's going to be, are we using it for telephone? Are we using it for chat? Are we using it for meetings, video meetings? Are we using it like this for a live event, like in replace of GoToWebinar or one of those other tools? And the other thing is then how do you communicate the things that you're doing that are pertinent to everybody and to the appropriate audience? So, many sort of, let's call it large, mid-sized organizations and up will have a dedicated communications tool, internal communications, not tool, people. And those people use tools like this to sort of get the word out. So what you got to decide is what are the kind of formal changes that we're going to be making that needs to get onto that list and that needs to be curated and probably sent out by that communications person. What's the format? What's the audience? Get on a cadence of, when we make a governance change, these are the changes that occur. This is how we're going to communicate it to all the end users. And maybe, certain audiences have a slightly different message based on how it might impact them. And again, I'm all about trying to be organized and be a well-oiled machine of predictability when changes occur. So if you don't have a communications plan, consider it. The one thing I kind of want to say is that all these these pieces independently are they're good, but communication on its own doesn't do governance, and even a governance plan on its own doesn't create governance or guidance. It's putting all the pieces together into a cohesive solution is where they work together and the magic really happens. And really sort of helping them, they support each other in getting your messaging out and really helping people use these tools better, which is really the goal. Okay, getting to the end. So as I said, it all roads lead back to feedback. So feedback is really where it's at. So this is the whole life cycle model of we start at the top, we work our way to the end, we gather feedback along the way, we require it, we measure like some things how we did. We now have some new items in our feedback list that drive our next meeting, and then we sort of come right back to it and we start again. Now we don't start again 100%. I'm not asking you to sort of do a full governance exercise every 3 to 6 months. What I'm saying is that it becomes more like maintenance afterwards. So the following, we got these 10 important items in the feedback list. We have X number of dollars or hours or resources over the next couple of months to get that into the roadmap or to get that into next quarter's deliverables. This one's really important. So we need to go back and we need to look at it. We need to understand, ask some questions about how it affects our existing governance policies, how it affects our training materials, how it affects our support, how it affects our communications plan. How do we make sure that that we guide people appropriately? You kind of update those materials, document the change, and then off you go. You kind of keep doing that over and over again at a pace that you can manage, right? Don't do more than you can, because it's not Field of Dreams. You really have to be there to help support it along the way. So again, if it's one thing you get from this, it's all about the feedback. All right, conclusion. And I apologize. I got literally I'm in presentation view and I don't even see the next slide. I don't see any notes. So all my notes are toast. So hopefully I caught most of what I wanted to talk about. So wrapping it up, the life cycle is the key, and don't try to do it all at once. You won't succeed that way. Every time we've tried it, it becomes a slog, and I'd rather piece it out a little bit in a way that's digestible. And we recommend kind of having 4 big documents, and sort of one is that questionnaire. Right, so that questionnaire is your living and breathing, driving you to conclusions about certain aspects of governance. And there's governance has pretty much the sections that we went through today. And you may need more, you may need less, but that sort of gets you there. And we believe in kind of this core governance document, which kind of writes down the specifics, but is readable and understandable, and it isn't inundated with a whole bunch of other stuff. It doesn't have the questions, it doesn't have configuration settings. It's really just kind of the high level points that someone could look at and say, oh, I get what's in here, and this all makes sense to me. And then we would have the third document be a configuration setting document. So this will contain screenshots. It will relate back to your core governance document in terms of we made a decision about this type of security or this type of external sharing. So I'm going to go make that setting back in the team's configuration area in the admin, and I'm going to take a screenshot to sort of indicate that at this point in time, this is what we did as a result with the technology, and it's referenced in this document kind of on this date. And that allows you to kind of manage version and history control. If you want to open up external sharing, then you change the configuration setting and you kind of rev the document in the next quarter. Not rocket science. But it helps keep things separate and readable and accessible by the right people. Most non-technology people don't really want to read a configuration settings document. And then finally, the roadmap. So obviously, I believe highly in managing and maintaining your roadmap along the way as a sort of a core and accessible document to most people. And just keep in mind that digital transformation is tough. It's really hard to say, oh yeah, in 6 months we were victorious. Yes, if you completed all the stuff in here and it's going, that's a victory. But really, you're going to look back over how is our organization using these tools now, or what are they doing now that they were doing 2 or 3 years ago? And I look at our own company, and we live and breathe this stuff, and what we're doing now, our drastic reduction in email. We almost don't send attachments at all anymore. The massive amount of sort of collaboration using Teams, the document co-authoring, just our own sort of comfort and use of these tools is really, you can see the difference. But I wouldn't necessarily say I saw a huge difference over 3 months. But over a year or two, absolutely. So just sort of keep that in mind as you're looking at your measurables and how you figure out what's working for you and what's not working for you. And change is hard, right? And asking people to do things they're not comfortable with takes some time, and it takes a lot of training and a lot of support. So stick with it. All right. I'm done.
We did have one question come in so far. So
Okay.
Ryan, what are your 3 most important things with regards to Teams implementations that you recommend in this cost-restrictive environment we live in?
Okay, I'm looking at it. I'm going to read it again. What are your 3 most important things in regards to Teams implementation you recommend in this cost-restrictive? Okay, 3 most important things. Okay. If I had to pick 3 of these high-level items, I think I would probably go with making sure I'm establishing feedback, training, and support. And that's just my model, because some people are going to yell at me and say, no, security, security. But I think, like, I got to get people using the tools first. And the way to do that is with training, support, and sort of getting and really working with people to get them to use it. Even Microsoft, whether I agree with it or not, recommends that you kind of let teams roll out at first and then apply governance, which is probably a cringeworthy proposition to a lot of people out there who were back in the days of SharePoint sprawl. But I understand what they're getting at, which is you got to see how people are going to use the tools for a little bit before you necessarily can jump in and create a whole bunch of guidance. And I understand that. So that's probably where I would start if I can only pick three. Governance shouldn't be a super expensive exercise either. It's not a huge project unless you make it that. You're right. Some people they can't help themselves and they just want to keep going and going. But I don't think you have to do that.
Awesome. Looks like
All
that
right.
was the only question we have today, so we can wrap things up. Just so everyone is aware, we will be sending out the recording of this webinar. I know a couple people asked specifically, so you can expect to get that later this week. And then we will also be releasing a white paper on this topic, so that'll be sent directly to your inbox as well. And if you still have more questions, feel free to reach out to us directly through the contact form on our website, timlinenterprises.com. And thank you all for attending.
Yep. And I'll just leave you with this. If anybody wants to get a little more information on kind of the documents that we use, happy to do that. I just didn't want to bore people with a bunch of boring sort of 10, 15 page templated documentation here. But happy to give us a call and we'll share with you the kind of nuts and bolts of how we put these documents together. But it's kind of important to see the high level approach first, and then happy to sort of go over it with people. All right.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. Everybody have a great day.